You know, when we picture the Middle Ages, our minds usually jump to kings, castles, and knights in shining armor, right? But lurking behind those stone walls, there was another power, one that was arguably even more influential in the day-to-day lives of, well, everybody.
See, in medieval Europe, the Catholic Church was pretty much the single most powerful and unifying force there was. It wasn't just a building you popped into on Sundays. Its influence was everywhere, shaping government, culture, and the daily routines of every single person on the continent.
So in this explainer, we're going to unpack the church's incredible power. We'll look at how it united people, its super organized chain of command, the way it controlled daily life, its role as the guardian of knowledge, and finally, how it was a core pillar of the entire feudal system.
First up, a world united by faith. You have to remember this was an era of local lords, tiny kingdoms, and almost constant conflict. It was a really fragmented world. And the church? Well, it was the one thing that connected just about everyone.
I mean, just think about that for a second. It didn't matter if you were a king sitting on a throne or a peasant working a field. You shared the exact same faith, you followed the same religious calendar, and you ultimately answered to the same spiritual authority. That created this incredible shared identity that went way beyond borders or social class.
So, how in the world did the church manage to have such an incredible reach? Well, it all came down to a highly organized, super effective chain of command that stretched all the way from Rome down to the smallest, most remote village.
Right at the very top, you had the Pope. And yeah, he was the spiritual leader for all Christians, but his power was so much more than just spiritual. The Pope could literally legitimize a king's right to rule by crowning him, or he could threaten that rule with excommunication. He had a major say in the laws of entire kingdoms.
Now, under the Pope, you had the bishops. These guys were seriously powerful figures who were basically in charge of large regions called dioceses. A lot of them were nobles themselves, and they were key advisors to kings and lords. They made sure the church's interests were always represented where the big decisions were being made.
And finally, you get down to the ground level, to the local priest. For the average person, the priest was the church. He was this constant presence in their community. He was there for baptisms, marriages, funerals. He was the one guiding people through every stage of their lives.
And this is a great look at how that whole structure fit together. You can see that clear flow of authority, right? From the Pope at the top, down through the bishops, and all the way to the priests in every little town. This top-down hierarchy was the absolute key to how the church maintained its power across all of Europe.
But the church's influence wasn't just about these big top-down power structures. It shaped the very rhythm of everyday life. It basically set the clock and the calendar for the entire medieval world.
The church bells literally told you when to get up, when to work, and when to pray. Your whole year was built around a cycle of religious festivals and saints' days, which, by the way, were often welcome days off. Big holidays like Christmas and Easter weren't just religious, they were huge community events. Even farming was tied to faith, with special prayers for planting and a good harvest.
Okay, so in an age where most people couldn't read or write, the church took on another absolutely vital role. It was the main hub for education, art, and preserving knowledge.
For hundreds of years, being literate was a super rare skill, something mostly found among the clergy. Because of that, monasteries and churches became the libraries and the archives of the medieval world. They saved so much information that would have just been lost to time otherwise.
And this is just brilliant. It shows the two-track communication strategy. For the tiny percentage of people who could actually read, you had these incredibly beautiful hand-copied manuscripts. But for everyone else, they had art. The amazing stained glass windows you see in cathedrals were basically giant, colorful comic books telling stories from the Bible in a way that anyone, literate or not, could understand.
So you see, monasteries were so much more than just places for prayer. They were libraries, saving ancient Greek and Roman texts. They were schools, offering a basic education. And they were the official record keepers, writing down all the key moments in a person's life. And then you have the cathedrals. Wow. These weren't just buildings. They were these massive public declarations of faith and power. I mean, some of them took centuries to finish. They became the real hearts of their communities, hosting services, of course, but also markets and festivals, all under the shadow of the church's authority.
So, that brings us to our final and maybe most important point. How did all of this spiritual, social, and cultural power make the church an absolutely essential part of the feudal system?
If you looked out over any medieval landscape, you'd see two buildings dominating the skyline. The Lord's Castle, representing military might and law, and the local church or monastery, representing spiritual authority. These two weren't separate. They were deeply connected, basically ruling medieval society together as partners.
And this quote from our source material really says it all. At the center of both spiritual life and political power was the Catholic Church. It was just impossible to pull the two apart. The Church gave the whole feudal order its moral justification, teaching everyone that this structure of society was actually God's will.
So in the end, the Church was the social glue. In a world that was really tough and had a very rigid social ladder, it gave everyone a shared purpose, a common moral compass, and the promise of salvation. That spiritual unity was absolutely essential for holding the whole complicated system of feudalism together.
So yeah, there's no question that in a chaotic and divided time, the church brought order, knowledge, and a sense of unity. It was the bedrock of medieval society. But that leaves us with a really important question to think about. What happens, for better and for worse, when one single institution holds that much power over every part of a person's life?